Hi, and welcome to the Board Wrap-Up Show with Dr. Pennington for the April 2014 Board of Education meeting. That's right, April. That means just about a month ago in the Ponca City School and the Oklahoma schools calendar. It's hard to believe, Dr. Pennington. We're about ready to wrap this up, aren't we?
Another year.
Yeah.
It's funny. The other day, people have been asking me all year, how long have you been here? And I've been saying, well, I've been here 9 years. This is actually my 10th year in the district. So we've been doing this for quite a while, Phil.
Well, when you lose track of it, but these years go by so quickly, don't they? These school years.
And I think it's because I'm getting older. I guess that's what they say. That when you get older, time flies.
I don't know. Best superintendent in the state, right there. Your April board meeting included a lot of discussions, but I think one of the things that people right now may have questions, young parents, and that is when they have students in the third grade, the retention of those students, whether they go to fourth grade, it has become something that people are questioning, and I thought you might go through that a bit for our
Well,
viewers.
it is obviously, there are probably, from an education standpoint, there are three really big issues right now in the state of Oklahoma. Common Core and what our state is going to do, whether they're going to stay in or get out, or how that's going to happen. The other issue is third grade retention, and then the other issue is funding. And those are really the hot topics. There are lots of things going on involving education at the Capitol, but those are probably the three major ones. Obviously this week, because we actually started to administer our state test this week, or actually last Thursday, we started state testing. The third grade retention law is really on the minds of parents of third graders. And the reason for that is because, first of all, it's new. For the first time in the history of the state of Oklahoma, we are going to let the state make the decision as to whether or not a third grader should be retained. Now, I think most people, when you think about it that way, it seems pretty ridiculous. I mean, it does to me, that the state of Oklahoma, that the people at 23rd and Lincoln will decide whether or not a third grade student in Ponca City, Blackwell, Guyman, Sayre, Lawton, Antlers, Broken Bow, whether that student will be retained. And that teachers and parents have no input into that decision. As we've gotten closer to this being implemented, all of a sudden, parents are not happy. They're not happy for a couple of reasons. One reason they're not happy is because this is important. Ever since the first day of school, we've been telling students that we're going to take this test. If you don't pass it, when we've told the kids what the consequences are. Well, naturally, I mean, you think about, if you can remember back to when you were in the third grade. I mean, I can't remember much of it other than, boy, you didn't want to be retained. You wanted to make your grades. Third graders are naturally people, they try to please everybody. So you've got some kids that are scared to death. And you have students who will have, I'm sure will have no problem on the test. But we didn't have incidences of this in Ponca City that I'm aware of, but, in today's world where you can read blogs and find out what's happening across the state, if you read blogs last week out of Tulsa and Oklahoma City, you had parents writing in saying, I dropped my son or daughter and they cried on the way to school today because of the test. Well, I think most of us would say that's ridiculous, okay? But that's where we are today. And we're in that situation because, and I think, you got to give people credit for for their ideas. This was a proposal by our current state superintendent, Dr. Janet Barisi. She thought this was an education reform that was desperately needed in Oklahoma. And so in 2011, she took this proposal and was its champion in the legislature. And it got passed. And I will tell you that that you know, I did the best I could to try to help our members of the state legislature understand this was not good legislation, that it was not right for kids. But I think that everybody at Oklahoma City was all swept up in this. We've got a Republican governor, a Republican state superintendent, Republicans in control of the House and the Senate, and we can make everything happen. We can make all these changes, and I think that this is what reform that got passed, and people really did not think through the consequences of that. And so that's where we are. Now, they've made some changes, and we have all these little caveats, hoops that kids can jump through that may allow them to go to the fourth grade. But the reality is we're making a decision about an 8-year-old based upon their performance on one test. Now, do we have children who are in the third grade that do not read on grade level? Yes, we do. We've had those children in our school systems forever. We work with those students all the time. We're always doing extra things. We have special reading groups for them. We work with them outside of the school day. We do special work inside the school day. We offer summer school. We do all kinds of things to help those children learn to read better. If you listen to the state superintendent, she makes it sound as if before she came into office we weren't doing anything. Again, that is patently not true for our district or any district I've ever been in. There may be some district in Oklahoma or some district in the country that when a student was struggling reading, people just ignored it and didn't try to do anything about it. We know some things that affect a student's ability to read. The primary factor is just flat reading itself. And we know that unfortunately for children who live in poverty, that a lot of times not only do they not get read to when they're young, but they don't see anybody at home ever read anything. And nobody reads to them at night. And they don't read outside of school. And those things dramatically affect a student's ability to read. But, you know, we try to work through that. Because of all the angst that's been caused by the third grade reading law, we actually have a piece of legislation that we're awaiting action for in the House. I have to go through my notes here, which is House Bill 2625. And if this bill has passed the House of Representatives, it's passed the Senate Education Committee, and now it's sitting in the Senate waiting for a vote on the floor of the Senate. If it passes, then it will go to the governor, and the governor will either sign it or veto it. And what this bill does is it takes that event. The student doesn't pass the third grade reading test, doesn't score well enough, because it's really not even passing it. They don't score well enough, and so instead of that being an automatic retention, that student then goes before a review committee. And that committee consists of teachers, counselor, and the parent. And then they discuss whether or not that student should go on to the fourth grade or whether they should be retained in the third grade. Which is exactly what we've done in this district for at least the last 10 years that I've been here. Now the difference is we didn't use one test to determine whether or not we put that committee together. What we looked at is we looked at a whole academic year of student work. We looked at all their performance from the beginning of the school year till we get to this point in time in the school year. We looked at how they did in our literacy first assessments. And did we think they had the skills, reading skills they needed to be successful to the next grade? And if that teacher decided that this student was a candidate for retention, then we met with parents and we discussed that. And, you know, we came to a decision whether or not that student should be retained. Sometimes that was a decision parents agreed with. Sometimes it wasn't. But but we took a whole body of academic work. We didn't just look at one indicator. Did we look at state tests? Yeah, that was a part of the process. The state test gave us additional information. And the fact that we're going through all this, that we've got to have another piece of legislation to fix it, is to me just, it's frustrating. There's lots of other words I'd like to use, but it's frustrating. But Phil, what this is an example of, this law, this third grade retention law, did not develop in Oklahoma. Okay? It wasn't something where, everybody's always been concerned about reading, and everybody's looking for a magic bullet. We'd love to be able to say that every student, every year they go through school is reading on grade level. It's that great, it's that, goal out there that we've never been able to achieve in education. I don't care where you go. You can go to the finest private school in the country. There are still students in that school who don't read on grade level. Now, it may be for different reasons than why our students don't read on grade level, but not everybody reads well. Now, for those of us who read, who it's a part of our life, we've never struggled with reading, we don't get it. We don't understand why a student can't read. And again, I have to qualify that, but when we say they don't read, we're not talking about just reading. We're not talking about picking up the newspaper and reading a story. We're talking about them being able to comprehend what they read and demonstrate they comprehend it. There are some other language skills in there too, so it's not as simple as just picking up the newspaper and being able to read it. There are some students who can't do that. Okay, there are others who can read well. If you just listen to them read out loud, you'd think, wow, that young person's a good reader. But when you ask them to tell you what they read, they can't. For whatever reason, they can't. Or maybe they can't, they don't understand words. They can read the word, but they don't really understand what it means. So this is not just a simple, as much as people want to think that it is. It's not just that kids can't read. But this idea that we have did not start in Oklahoma. It is not something that we had meetings across the state and said, public, what do you think the biggest concern in Oklahoma education is? We didn't have hearings on it across the state. We didn't talk about it at the state capitol. But what we did is our current state superintendent and members of the legislature who, they were in this too, because of a group called the Foundation for Education Excellence. You've heard me talk about them before, which is a group it's a foundation that Jeb Bush, a former Florida governor, potential presidential candidate in the Republican Party in 2016, because of this foundation he's put together, they advocate this. They advocate third grade retention. They think that's a good thing. They did this in Florida, and if you read their paperwork, what they'll tell you is we did this in Florida, and we saw this great improvement in third grade reading scores. Well, what they neglect to tell you is that at the same time they did the third grade retention law, they also put $160 million into early childhood reading, first and second grade, okay, to help those kids get ready. The other thing they neglect to tell you is that while their third grade reading scores go up, those scores go back down fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So at the end of the day, they're not really any different today than they were before they passed the law. Now, the reason for that is because of the recession, they had to cut out the early reading program. So that $160 million went away, and the early reading program went away. They don't tell you that. Okay? And so because our state superintendent joined a group called Chief for Change, which is a group of superintendents across the country who adopted Jeb Bush's philosophy, she brought this program to the state of Oklahoma. So that's where we are. It happened. It was an out-of-state program. We brought it in. There's nothing wrong with out-of-state programs. I go to conferences all the time, and I get ideas. But I come back and I run those ideas through my staff, and if they're a dramatic change, we'll have parent meetings and we'll discuss those ideas with our parents and make sure that we have buy-in from them before we go to our Board of Education and implement a policy. But that's where this comes from. It is the same as Common Core, to the extent that Common Core was not an Oklahoma idea. Now, I will tell you, I know Common Core is not popular right now. I'm in favor of the Common Core. From my perspective, the Common Core is just the latest evolution of standards. There will be another change in standards 10 years from now. What I liked about the Common Core, I liked the idea of a national assessment. And I like the idea of a national assessment because I want to know how our kids compare to kids in Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas in an apples-to-apples comparison. Now, do I think those tests should be used to grade teachers? No. Do I think those tests should be used to grade schools? No. I think those tests should be used by teachers to look at how their students do, and we should make adjustments in our curriculum and our instruction based upon those test results. And I also liked it because it took the test score, what is passing and not passing on a state test, it took it out of the hands of politicians and put it in the hands of education professionals. So I like that because right now our test scores, what's passing, what's not passing, that is determined by the State Board of Education and the state legislature. And it's a political process. It's not made on judgments of professionals. So I think that's a good idea. Plus, the basketball goal is 10 feet all across the country. We don't have problems with that kind of a national standard. Well, I think that'd be the same in schools. But we've rejected Common Core in this state because it's not Oklahoman, because it came out of Washington, D.C. From my perspective, it doesn't really matter whether it's an idea from the Foundation for Education Excellence, whether it's an idea from ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, whether it's an idea from Washington, D.C., from whatever the current administration is. Those are all groups that have politically driven agendas that are influencing and really almost dictating education policy across the country. They all have the same goal, and that is to make education policy the same across the country. And it takes the local school board out of the process. It takes parents and teachers out of the process. It takes administrators out of the process. And it puts education policy totally in the hand of state officials. And from my perspective, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that when you do education policy, you ought to involve all the players, everybody that's got a stake, ought to at least be able to go to the table and express their opinion. They may not listen to it, but at least you've had a chance to point out to them what's good about a particular policy and what's bad about a particular policy. And that's kind of the way I think democracy is supposed to work. And we've not done that with education policy in this state since 2011. The 8F grade card is another Foundation for Education Excellence idea. Right now, there's a charter bill. It is, I have to look at my notes because there's so much education legislation out there. You're going to have to...
I would like to, we've kind of transitioned from third grade retention to Common Core. Mm-hmm. And from what I'm hearing, Common Core does not retain students like the third grade retention. Common Core is completely different in that fact.
What Common Core does is it has a set of standards for everything that we teach. We have standards now for everything that we teach. Okay, what happened with Common Core is, and it's another example of how outside influences dictate Oklahoma education policy. About 5 or 6 years ago, the United States Chamber of Commerce issued a report, and they said, we think, basically what they did is they accused states of fudging their proficiency rates in reading and math. And they did that because they looked at a test called the NAEP, and they said, and Oklahoma was one of those states, they said, Oklahoma, your proficiency rates that you're reporting for math and English reading don't match up with what the National Assessment of Education Progress says your rates are. You guys are not real, you're fudging on your cut scores. You should have a higher pass, whatever it takes to pass, that number should be higher. Chamber did that, National Chamber did that, because the people they serve, which are the major corporations in America, are very concerned about how our students perform when compared on international tests. Okay? So, when that report came out, the Governors Association got together and said, we need to bring some standardization to the standards that we have and the way we assess them. And so that's where so they came together and said, let's adopt a common set of standards. That's where Common Core comes from. Okay? So again, that happened because of concerns expressed by some of the largest corporations in America. Now, obviously, they have a voice. They're concerned about future employees. They have to compete internationally, all right? So that's why that happened. And then, on top of that, not only do they set standards, but they also set assessments. So the idea would be we'd be able to assess. What has upset people about Common Core, there are a couple of things. There are some that see that as a national curriculum. And we've never had a national curriculum in the United States. Each state's done their own thing. Okay? They're pretty similar because, math, two-digit addition is two-digit addition, no matter where you do it. Writing a 5-page paragraph is writing a 5-page paragraph no matter what state you do it in. There may be some differences where certain academic concepts are introduced. We may introduce two-digit addition at the beginning of 3rd grade. New York may introduce it at the end of 2nd grade. I mean, there's those just slightly different things. So we've always been very similar in what we do. But we haven't had a curriculum that multiple states have raised their hands and say, we're all going to do the same thing. So that alarmed some people. The other thing that alarmed some people was that for the first time, when they developed the Common Core standards, instead of just seeing what the National Council for Language Arts said our standards ought to be and the National Council for Mathematics, they looked at international standards. They looked at, okay, so what does Singapore say about math? What does Great Britain say about science? And so they took those international standards and they looked, and then when they put the Common Core together, they included those international standards. There are some people in our country that don't like international stuff. We're the United States, and nobody else should tell us what to do. And they shouldn't tell us how to teach, and they shouldn't tell us what to teach, and they shouldn't tell us how to test it. So there's that part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that in addition to the standards and the assessment, the states decided again, and this is something that is an ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council initiative, along with the Foundation for Education Excellence, along with the Gates Foundation, the Walton Foundation, and the Broad Foundation. These big organizations that are influenced by corporate donations have been very adamant, very strong advocates of the use of test scores in teacher evaluation. that that in the normal way we evaluate teachers, when we go in and we look at how they do their instruction, how is their classroom organized, are kids on task, they want us to not only look at that, but they want to come back in and say, how are the students in that class performing? And again, on surface, why wouldn't you do that? Okay, why wouldn't you want to look and see how kids are performing? And they want to make that a big enough part of the evaluation that if I teach my students and we take the state test and my students, say I've got 20 kids in a class and half of them do not score proficient on the reading test or the math, whatever it is, then that has a negative effect on my evaluation, to the point that I can eventually, if your test scores don't reach a certain point, you're automatically fired. Doesn't matter that that your kids made great academic progress, that they started at point A and you took them to point D, but what matters is they weren't proficient. Okay, obviously teachers were not real thrilled with that, but the other people aren't real thrilled about it were parents, because again, if you think kids have pressure on them now because they've got to pass a third grade retention test, how much pressure is going to be on students when a teacher's job depends upon how those kids score on the test? And again, I've said this before, what as a parent or grandparent, what do you want teachers focused on in that classroom? Well, you want them focused on learning, obviously, but you also want them to be caring, nurturing people. You want learning to be an enjoyable experience. You want it to be an experience where children are given, where new ideas are introduced, and they have a chance to think and explore. That's what American education has always been. But all of that goes away with the assessment part, because teachers, because their job is on the line, they're going to by all human nature, they're going to focus more and more of their time on the things that are assessed. Again, the use of student test data to evaluate teachers was not discussed across the state of Oklahoma. We had no meetings across the state. We didn't invite parent, teachers, grandparents, community members to come in and say we think this is a good or bad idea. We just enacted it. Okay, and parents have looked at that and said, we don't like that. We don't want our students. We don't want the curriculum narrowed. We don't want our kids to only be involved in test prep. We want education to be an expansive experience. And so that's really, in a nutshell, the different groups that don't like the Common Core.
Let's talk about funding. We had a day several weeks ago where schools devoted an entire day to talk about funding with the Oklahoma legislature. You discussed funding at your April board meeting. I know you think that had an effect, but have we seen any effects of 30,000 people standing at the south steps of our state capitol?
We obviously have, and again, I've got to find because we have a vehicle that has the opportunity to really change the discussion of education funding in Oklahoma, and that's House Bill 2640. And what this bill does is it mandates, for a 10-year time period, it takes $60 million off the top before any money is appropriated to any state agency, and it directs it toward the state aid formula. Now, the state aid formula is that part of school funding that we get, that we pay teachers with, that we pay the utility bills, that we operate our schools. Sometimes somebody will see, well, education got $100 million, but that money may have gone to the State Department. It may have gone into health insurance. It may have gone into public television. This is state aid money, the money we most desperately need to operate our schools, to get our class sizes back down, and to restore our staffs that we've lost because of budget cuts. That bill passed the House with I think only passed the House by a vote of 94-1. So it has very strong support in the state legislature. On March 31st, or excuse me, 2 days after, I think it was April 2nd, that bill went before the Senate Appropriations Committee and passed with a vote of 20-2. I assure you that that bill would not probably have gotten out of committee if we hadn't have had 25,000 people at the state capitol 2 days before. They changed the bill, and some changes they've made to it have made it controversial. Because what the Senate did is, instead of taking $60 more off the top for education, they looked at the roads fund and said, we're going to take the roads money and we're going to split it between schools and roads. So we're going to take the $59 million that the road's getting, and next year we're going to give half of it to schools, half of it to roads. Do that for 3 years until the roads fund is filled up with $475 million. Right now they get $59 million off the top, and they're to get that money until the road fund appropriation grows to $475 million. Then that's supposed to stop. So what the Senate version would do would be take that money, divide it between roads and schools, and then when the roads money is filled up, then give schools $60 million a year until they reach that $600 million. Obviously, the roads people are concerned about that. They don't want to share the money they're getting, and I don't think anybody would blame them for that. I think it is worth reminding everybody that the roads people, the roads fund has gotten new dollars every year throughout the recession. While schools have either been level funded or lost funding, funding for roads has increased in this state. I think if you gave most voters a vote and you said, would you rather, of these, and roads funding is critical, if you had a choice of these critical needs in Oklahoma, would you rather fund schools or would you rather fund roads? I kind of think I know how people would vote on that. So right now, there's lots of behind-the-scenes stuff going on, trying to see if there's a way to come up with a method that will get schools the money they need at the same time protecting the roads fund. Right now, the big issue, the main thing, is to keep the bill alive, because there are groups out there that are trying to kill this legislation. They don't want it to go to the Senate floor for a vote. Right now, this bill has been through the House Common Education Committee, the House of Representatives, and the State Appropriations Committee, and in 3 times this bill's been voted on, there have been 5 no votes. So I think that, again, I think the legislature understands that schools need money, that we're desperate, that we're dying on the vine, and we need help. And so, you know, if anybody out there watching thinks that that's true, you need to let Senator Eddie Fields know that you want 2642 to get a vote on the Senate floor. And you need to let Senator Fields know that's important. And you probably ought to let Brian Bingman know that. He's the president pro temp of the Senate. And Senator Bingman needs to know that as a citizen, you want this voted on. You know, it may not pass. It may be that they can't come up with a compromise, and it may be that there are people who have reservations about creating another fund off the top. And, you know, I understand that. I'm an American government teacher. I understand, you know, that you got to be careful about how you do things. But at least deserves a vote. Our kids and our teachers and our parents who went to the Capitol, those 25,000 people deserve a vote on the Senate floor on this legislation. And I hope we can get that.
Anything else about the April meeting or in general that you wanted to pass along?
No, I think that's fine. I think I would just encourage people, if you have any questions about legislation, you know, feel free to contact me about that. If anything today, I would strongly encourage you to call and let Senator Fields know your position on House Bill 2642. I would let I have to find you can kind of see now why the legislature drives me crazy when
Absolutely.
they're in
I
session.
mean, you're a superintendent, but you
Yeah.
almost sound like a state legislator
Yeah.
today. So
House Bill 2625. Also, let's talk to Senator Fields about that. And there's another bill that I think is very important, and that's Senate Bill 1654. And what this bill does is it removes all state testing grades 3 through 8 that's not mandated by federal law. And this would be a huge relief for teachers and children in this state. So the only test we would take would be reading and math in grades 3, 5, and 8. And I think that's a great first step toward ending the assessment, what I just call the craziness of assessment that we have in Oklahoma. And right now that's in front of the House, and we need to call Representative Vaughn and let him know to vote yes on Senate Bill 1654.
Dr. Pennington with us on our board wrap-up for the month of April 2014.